Recording in progress. Hey, Tom, are you there? We can see you now.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now. All right, great.
A little fuzzy sounding, but I'll put my earphones in.
All right, we'll call Committee of the Whole to order. First, I'm going to move to approve the minutes of the September 16th Committee of the Whole.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. And that motion passes. All right, so we have one thing on the agenda today, which is an update from the Planning Department regarding the proposed downtown development. Director or Assistant Director Boss, I think, or Director Byington. Okay, Boss. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam President. So we appreciate the opportunity. We were hoping that we would have the financials from Casto at least to provide that as an initial discussion tonight. It was the whole kind of the reason why we had scheduled this. And unfortunately, it was last week while we were having an initial meeting with the schools. I got contacted by Casto, and they said that they're not ready to provide those numbers, and so they requested about a 3-week delay. And so I appreciate the consideration on that. So we are having to punt the financials until October. Right now, 21st is the Committee of the Whole meeting that we're now shooting for that, and I'll cover more on the process, but I just wanted to get that, talk about today as much as we can. I think it's just taking the opportunity to try to provide an update on kind of where we are in the process, a little bit of background on plan development, the project itself, the council priorities, kind of a soup to nuts on the project right now, or where we're at. And then we can get into a little bit on the content of the development agreement, since that's kind of, I think that's kind of where we're leaning and top of mind for a lot of council members. That we appreciate you sitting in on some of the smaller meetings last month with Casto as we kind of get a warm start in this process towards a final PD submittal to you all in the coming months. So I'm going to run through this. The background kind of on the code on the project. I will go through the Casto's latest slide deck, which is from the 12 September ABR meeting. We'll talk about the process, and then I'll go into the Planning Commission approval, some of the conditions and kind of the final products of that, and then we'll go through the development agreement content just and have a discussion. We have the questions that we're kind of tracking the questions as they're going through. And so I think that's one of the great things about this opportunity is to get some of those things on the floor, start having that discussion. I will be the first to admit that I will not have all of the answers or any of the answers at this point in time, especially the relation to specific financials and some of those other considerations. But this is all part of, I think, the opportunity is part of the learning process and just getting everybody kind of baselined as an azimuth check as we keep moving forward on this project. So I think everyone's familiar with the site. So this project, I think everyone's aware, but just this project's being advanced under the section of our code for plan development. It provides the widest flexibility in terms of zoning. It is an actual rezoning of the property, and that's why it requires council approval ultimately. It's one of the most arduous processes in terms of its preliminary and final stages with both Planning Commission and ABR. And so it takes a long time for a lot of these projects to work their way through, especially with a complex project like the one before you here. But there's some of the purpose behind it in terms of promoting the development there, and then the development that's consistent with the community vision. And so these code aspects, obviously, these are the things that we've provided to both Planning Commission and ABR throughout their review process. And so as part of that, they're charged with reviewing this project under the guises of these standards and purpose and the guidelines and the design criteria and everything that's contained within this chapter. So the background timeline, just going back to 2020 on this. So the preliminary review of this project went basically from December of 2020 through December of 2022. And so that includes all of those events up there in terms of the updated development program, the downtown advisory panel, the negotiation, at least the initial authorization and negotiated development agreement, all the way through preliminary review by both Planning Commission and the Architectural Board of Review. I will highlight the preliminary review, especially on the ABR side, took a long time to get through, and that was predominantly because of the site plan as it relates to the Curtis Block building. And you had that, the building one that was basically integrated, attached to the Curtis Block, kind of over it. It's a very hard thing in terms of an architectural consideration of what's appropriate, and that ultimately that took almost 5 months to get through. And so, but we did. And then, as you were well aware, in terms of the final process, with that update back in June of last year, as the project was restructured, as the Roundstone office building and office use exited the project, and then we went through two subsequent changes to the one that you see today. Those are all based on market factors, really out of the control of both Casto and the city, as this project's just continued to kind of adapt and in my view, become more flexible, kind of more appropriate to the site, towards more adaptive, flexible uses going forward. As you're well aware, I think the change in April was the grocer. Great opportunity, but if you sat through the update on that, you're well aware of kind of the limitations that were associated with that site plan, or I should say required of that site plan in terms of semi-sized truck traffic, delivery, and automobile, or really that vehicular flow throughout the site. That grocer at a 40,000 square foot really drove the development and the plans for building one, and locked in a lot of things that were, in my view, counter to a lot of the kind of direction and guidance that the commission and the boards had kind of given before. The plaza was smaller in terms of the grocer took up more space towards Detroit, and then you had a very, very significant traffic impact on Bell. And then just the inflexibility of a building. If you're building it, a bespoke building for a grocer that has those things associated with it, and then if that, I think thankfully the decision was made at a corporate level to back away from that model for that specific corporation, and not that decision being made in 2 years from now after the building was built. And then we're kind of stuck with a large space that can only be filled by a regional or national tenant like that, and that's a hard thing to be stuck with. So we started again in July with the current project that's before you now, and so we'll go through that here in a little bit. So you can see the PD approval process moves through the preliminary stages of both Planning Commission, then ABR, then back to Planning Commission, then back to ABR, then back to Council for that final approval. Under the code, just so everybody's aware, under 115604, that's the procedures for approval of a final PD plan. Steps 1 through 6, all the way through 7 there on your screen kind of cover that preliminary process. A lot of the qualifications for standards, the same standards that apply for a preliminary review, apply for a final review, which is a little confounding and confusing in our code, but it's the way it's written. down to where we're at right now with Architectural Board of Review, finishing their stage, their last review of the project, and then it hits on item 8 there. And so once we have the final PD plan from ABR, an approved lot split, and that plat, which is what Planning Commission approved, and it's now in its final engineering review, and then it will be updated, printed, and signed, and you'll get the signed plat, and then you'll get that approved development agreement. Those three things kind of make up the package, I'll call it, the final PD package that gets submitted to council. And then I just should be aware, item D, once that package is submitted, council has 45 days to approve that package. And so that's built into our process. And after, should the project then be approved, then the plat gets recorded. Everything kind of starts to move forward at that point. So this is the process schedule that we've been working with since July. It's been updated. I think this is the 4th iteration of it, as things have kind of shifted left to right. It is a bit of an eye chart, but it does lay out kind of everything from top to bottom, left to right, in terms of how the process has played out. They're over, was 6 months, now it's 7 months. And so we've extended it to January based on the most recent delay with the financials. But at the top left, you can see the initial plan submittal there on the middle of July that led to the 3 meetings with Planning Commission. The first of those were joint Planning Commission ABR meetings. I think really helped kind of set the stage for discussion, eliminate some of the back and forth that we experienced during the preliminary review, and got us to a Planning Commission approval in 3 meetings. We had a public meeting on the 21st of August at the Cove Community Center, and then that was in advance of ABR then picking up their final review. And right now we have them projected for 3 meetings with a 4th if needed. And so that plays out through October. You can see the meeting today there under City Council, on the City Council line. On the 23rd, it's haloed in yellow. And then that leads to next month with a discussion of financials as slated on the 21st of October. That should lead us to what we're targeting a time frame for that, the submittal of the final PD package on or around the 8th of November. That date, I know, is in advance of the docket deadline for the 18th meeting, which is the first meeting that it should be on the docket, or that we're targeting to get it on the docket. But recognizing that we have to submit kind of everything by code to council for the meeting on the 18th, but we also need to get the draft compensation agreement to the Board of Education, and they meet also on the 18th, and their deadline is the 8th. So we're kind of shooting off the 8th to get it to both elected bodies to start kind of that final review process. So that starts the 45-day clock on the 18th, and that carries us through the meetings on the 18th, the 2nd, the 16th, and I know I don't have the date for the first meeting in January. I'm assuming it's the 6th or somewhere around there, but that would carry us to the 6th, and so that would be a total of 4 specific council meetings with what I can only assume will be intervening committee meetings occurring. So 5, probably more meetings to get through both those 3 products, the final PD plan, the plat, and the development agreement draft. Our hope is to have that further discussion on development agreement and some of the content and more stuff in advance of that next month in October. Kind of going back to some of the comments and discussion we had in August, so that you can, again, just kind of get every member kind of ramped up into this process to try to avoid this big drop of unfamiliar documents and things on the 18th. So that's the process schedule as it is. This is a living document. Keep updating it as we go through it. It's just so you can kind of see the whole process as it plays out. There's our public meeting that we had in August, open house. And so now kind of the key elements of the development program. This slide's been around for a long time. And I've just really changed one line as it's gone from office to a grocer to now a retail space. But we believe it meets all 6 of these in terms of that. It does introduce new retail space, does provide affordable housing units per our CRA1, provides that opportunity for a unique urban community space, does preserve the designated exterior of the Curtis block. We believe it positions the site to serve as a catalyst for additional opportunities downtown, and it does add a lot of public parking in relation to the development's uses as well as the surrounding uses. I think everyone's familiar with the development objectives. These have been around since at least 2017. They have not changed, and these have really driven, they've driven Casto. This is kind of Casto's charge in terms of their guidelines for the development, as well as our review. Now, you're all well aware of the council priorities that were provided in Resolution 2022-14. And so as kind of, this is a slide that I've developed over time. It's been at every single planning commission meeting. It's been at the public open house. It's become part of the deck as we work through this, just so we maintain kind of sight on all these things as well. As you work through kind of density and opportunity, community space, local businesses, Curtis Block, sustainability, affordable and accessible housing, fiduciary responsibility, I believe the project fits most, if not all of these, in some way, shape, or form. And so we can talk about these things in greater detail. As I was thinking through and as I just keep track of these things as we go through, as the project is kind of matured and progresses, it does increase residential density. The density of this project is 6.5 times the average density in Lakewood in terms of dwelling units per acre, dwelling units per square mile, however you want to measure it. It's a lot of dwelling units. It's almost 300 in a 5.5 acre plot. It's got opportunities for future growth. There's flexibility built into Building 1 that Casto's highlighted. That's one of the main kind of flexible options there in addition to the existing retail space. Community space has always and will be purpose-built to support public use. It is a public-private venture, as I understand. That is just how this development and how it has to play out. But that's part of the development agreement, and we can talk about that in greater detail as we move along. But that is a key part of the development agreement, is the management of that community space, how it's managed, how you hold events there, how you get permits to hold events there, who kind of gets their arms around those things. And I will say, just no project is going to be perfect from go. We're trying to kind of put the pieces in place to provide exactly as the priorities as you've laid out, to make that public space, what everyone wants it to be. And so, but it's going to be an evolving kind of process. As we get things wrong, we get things right, you make it stronger, you make the permits, the programming, the community ties, in terms of the organizations that run events there will likely evolve over time, just as they have throughout the entire community. And that's part of that design and management with community partners. Local businesses, in terms of the retail, I know that it's in Casto's best interest to ensure continual active usage of the space. They are engaging with, I think, all levels of business, and we will continue to connect them as much as we can with the different business groups through Lakewood Alive and the Chamber here in Lakewood. And I know one of the aspects of that, the latest version of the Curtis block is specifically designed for local businesses in terms of those commercial bays on the first floor and the renovation of those fit. That is the model of kind of the Lakewood storefront, and that's why they're doing it. And it will be targeted through, various different tools that we can talk about, I think, kind of as the financials come in and ask those questions of Casto and how they incentivize and kind of target those types of spaces, the smaller retail spaces for local businesses that they typically want. Curtis Block, I think I talked a little bit about just the change from the preliminary to the final review has been kind of a 180 in terms of the site plan and the approach from the project. It's kept whole. In fact, it's kept whole on all four sides in terms of that four-sided design. Even the former porches on the back are being renovated, updated to be an integral part kind of the residential component on the second floor of that building, just probably as they were 100 years ago or whenever it was built. It is being, the use is being consistent in terms of that residential on top, local commercial business on the bottom, with some appropriate updates that are being reviewed by ABR, just like they normally would, to activate that building in terms of its relationship with the plaza as well as Building 1. I talked about the porches on the back. There's a lot of consideration and plans for art and openings and how a business that's in that westernmost bay also has a frontage on the public plaza and not just facing Detroit. And so they're thinking through all these types of things. Sustainability, the importance of sustainable design and performance in connection with the community vision, the IWIP, and our climate action plan. This is a specific thing that is it will be in the development agreement. It was in the earlier draft of the development agreement in terms of what you require in that agreement, the developer to make best efforts towards energy efficiency, renewable energy, and those types of items. And so I don't have a lot of specific details on those, but that's one example of something that is detailed out in the development agreement. I think you're well aware of our own requirements for IWIP and stormwater management, and is a key piece of this as well. Affordable and accessible housing. They have made the move to incorporate 3-bedroom units, and there's the 2,000 square foot townhomes. They're bigger than my house. And most of the buildings, I would say, and this is really a question, I am not a universal design expert by any means, but these buildings are designed with modern standards, I would say, but the accessibility, if you have specific questions, we need to get into that with Casto in terms of the specific design and DIMIT, and how those buildings are designed to support universal design. Creating opportunities, well, it is a predominantly rental base, and I think that is just the market driving this. The predominant owner-occupied opportunities are those townhomes that are being built into the south portion of the site. The affordability aspect, if you're familiar with CRA1, in terms of the 20%, that is part of the project. They do plan on taking that incentive and us having to meet that requirement. And then the fiduciary responsibility, we'll talk about, as your priority discussed, independent review. That's part of our plan. PMC has been, we updated their professional services contract in the spring as we were anticipating this final review process, and so they're standing ready to review those financials once we get them. And so they're kind of the independent review that we rely on for the pro forma and everything else associated with the project. And that's what I'm hoping, and we're working towards making kind of those things and those aspects all part of that pre-submission review on the 21st of October. And I know I keep saying that, but if I had the numbers, I'd give them to you. I just don't have them right now. Site, still a big hole. And now I'll go through the PD presentation. I'll flip over to that real quick, just for those who haven't seen it. So I will say the majority of the site plan kind of, and I'm sorry my laser pointer is going to be going to the wrong direction, but kind of from the north side of the parking garage south really hasn't changed a whole lot in past probably 2 years in terms of this design. It's always been centered on a large parking garage to support the multitude of uses, predominantly that heavy residential density in there, as well as the 75 spots that we're required to provide the clinic based on the hospital master agreement, as well as the retail space. And so it is I think it stands at about 535 or 537 spaces. It's a large garage, and that's always kind of been anchored at that same point there. To the east, you've got a 4-story apartment building, and then to the south, we've always had these kind of, been calling them the garden apartments, and they've kind of matured over time. You know, like they were originally like 3 separate buildings with like the pool and all this, like the amenities, and then kind of the discussion during the preliminary review was, well, that puts a lot of the amenities really far away from the majority of the residents that are actually in building 1. So some of the site considerations have obviously changed. The townhomes have always been situated furthest away, since they are one of the smallest structures as you kind of step down from Detroit in terms of that residential massing and scale. Those have always been on the south side of the site. And then kind of north of the parking garage, the footprint of building 1 has obviously changed the most as you've gone from a fairly large multi-story office building to a 40,000 square foot grocer with residential above it, to now this flexible kind of adaptable retail space that right now you've got first floor parking to support that retail and some other uses in there. But it speaks to kind of the podium construction of the building itself, which allows both the parking and the retail space. The retail space can be configured as they start to sign letters and leases with retailers. That retail space will be built out according to the needs of restaurant or gym or whatever the use that'll be moving into that space. But I would highlight, just based on the construction of the building itself, there is a possibility built in for adaptability as you go to the future, so they could expand the retail into that parking area and make it larger if they needed to. And they can always change kind of the configuration of the retail space in of itself in terms of those uses as things shift around or needs, markets change in the future. And then the public plaza has obviously evolved and kind of morphed over time. If you've been around long enough, it was on the corner, now it's in the center. I feel like, based on the feedback and everything that we've received and the time that's been spent on this project, the location of the plaza is in the right spot right now, and how it relates to kind of being supported on 3 sides by retail as well as the Curtis block in that upper corner. So that's kind of how the site has evolved over time. I will say the retail or the residential leasing office and that kind of entrance space has also kind of shifted around a lot. That amenity space and the leasing office and everything for the residential units on the site was originally supposed to be on the first floor of the Curtis block, and that was kind of during the preliminary review. Then it was shifted over, and I can't remember where it was before, when the grocer was there, and then when the grocer left, it allowed kind of, I think, a much better, higher and better use of that area kind of behind building 1 on the east side across from the clinic. That was where your semi-truck traffic would have had to come in and out every day, every morning to support that grocer. And it was a very awkward, like, turn and back in and to service a normal kind of grocer, retailer, loading dock type situation that was kind of tucked up underneath the building. So now they've shifted the majority, because this is obviously designed for kind of that medium to smaller retail spaces. You don't need semis. Delivery trucks that they're anticipating are a lot smaller, much more kind of Lakewood sized, I would say, in terms of the traffic that you normally see. It's not going to be the beverage delivery trucks that park in the middle of Detroit or Madison. At least that's not what we're anticipating. But this space kind of in the center right behind building 1 is the loading dock. Because of you're probably aware of the elevation change as you move north to south as well as east to west. It goes down kind of to the center of building 1, and so it'll be actually kind of hard to see what's going on down in there. But that is the loading area. That's also the entry for that parking as part of Building 1. So that kind of bifurcation of that point, or that line in the site, allows you to create kind of a second little plaza or little courtyard in there that kind of faces the clinic. But it's really the interaction between, and it's predominantly, it's pedestrian oriented, as that is the flow point kind of for the pedestrians to come out of the parking garage and either go, to the residential leasing office or the amenity space or whatever, to go up to their unit, or to follow one of the paths that is designed through the retail space to come into the plaza. And so I think that's one of the nice changes in terms of the plan as it's evolved, is that now you really have a large public space, a smaller public space, and then a third pocket park kind of on the down in the garden apartment areas, as well as a pretty developed or opportunity-rich linear park along Bell there used to be liner units. If you were familiar with the preliminary plan, those were taken away. And so there's more space. That's kind of a linear park, public art opportunities, a lot of things. Also to be discussed in the development agreement in the section of public art. So let me just kind of, there's a lot of study to vehicular and pedestrian circulation throughout the site. If you sat through Planning Commission or ABR meetings, we spent a lot of time in July and August on these slides as they've evolved over time. So there's an awful lot of consideration of how people and vehicles will move through the site. There you can get an appreciation for the elevation change, kind of east to west, north to south. And some other sites there. There's a lot of detail on these. We can come back if you want, but let's just kind of run through the renderings and then some of the landscape. Public plaza, as it's currently imagined. I think one of the comments to come out of the board and commission review was to allow this to not make it so hard and set that it's inflexible, but to make it more flexible, open, adaptable, more permeable to Detroit was kind of the language that was used, so that it's welcoming. It's not, the landscaping's not so harsh on the Detroit frontage that that you don't really see it, or it's not open and inviting. And so this is one thing that ABRs continue to work on as they finalize landscaping and materials and the tiles and the surface material that's used in the plaza. Curtis block, as it's envisioned, update. It's basically just an updated, cleaned up version of its current self to make those storefronts usable, accessible. Here's the alleyway between the Curtis block and Building 1 with the reconstructed porches. And then those open large windows on the first floor of Building 1 there on the left side, that's the start of the retail space on that side of the building. Then curving down Marlowe, there's the drive to go down to the service and the parking entrance behind Building 1, and then the start of Building 3. This is the other side of Building 1 on Bell. So this is looking at kind of that first floor retail. The setbacks have been designed to allow more usage of outdoor space in relation to those retail spaces, whether they're restaurants or what have you, in terms of outdoor dining or other uses out there. And then this is also that small entry kind of plaza or public space between the parking garage and either the leasing amenity office or the interior hallway or pathway to get to the plaza that also has the public restrooms in it. Another view of that. One of the things that they've added based on Planning Commission, you'll see that in the conditions, is a crosswalk across Bell between this space and the clinic, just as a response to that they've got 75 spaces and probably more people are going to park there that use the clinic, and so just trying to facilitate that crossing with the, and you'll see on this, if you go back to the site plan in terms of the bump outs and everything that's envisioned on Bell and Marlowe, it's a pretty significant change to the existing streetscape that's much more pedestrian friendly. Start of the garage, the corner kind of hard kind of corner tower elements that make it look a lot less like a parking garage as you look down it. As they're still working through the landscaping, but there's a lot of thought being put into the landscaping to kind of soften and just alter the appearance of that garage down Bell. And that you can start to see kind of the linear park. Flipping sides over to Marlowe, this is building 3. There's a very conscious effort as we live through it with the preliminary review into the final review in terms of as this development steps back from Detroit and looking and referencing our commercial design guidelines to looking and referencing more of our residential design guidelines that we've recently kind of worked through. You'll start to see the repetition, at least on kind of vertical and horizontal lines, interpretations of front porches and those types of elements that start to make kind of to get into that rhythm as you move back there. It may not be your style or your thing, but there is an awful lot of thought being put into the neighborhood context and to trying to integrate this development as much as possible into the massing, the scale, and the design, everything that we ask for in our code. It's a challenge. It's never easy, but they're working hard at it. This is the back end of Building 3. This is the new drive that'll separate kind of the garage, Building 3, and then the garden apartments and that pocket park. You kind of start to get an appreciation for that elevation change too, and looking at the 4 stories there back towards Detroit. This is the latest on it, and they're still working on these garden apartments, but here you can really see the attempts to kind of at least pay homage to the roof lines and the different kind of rhythms and porch styles and things that you see on a Lakewood street. Not easy to get the residential density that's one of the underlying goals of this project, while also respecting kind of the neighborhood context. And this is how they envision it kind of with landscaping and everything that's being contemplated. And there is that path, there's that pedestrian path that cuts across between Bell and Marlowe behind the garden apartments, between the townhomes and the garden apartments there that they have depicted there. They're working through lots of different material and color options still with ABR and that's really the charge of ABR over the next couple of meetings is they're digging into that materials, landscaping, the finer details of this plan. Looking at the pocket park, you can get a sense for the change in elevation from Marlowe to Bell. This is another thing that we've been around and around on several times in terms of the design, the pathways. They added kind of temporary parking spaces here for deliveries and other things, which is a good addition on that new road. Then kind of adds its vision. You can see the mass and the scale and the design as it kind of steps back from Detroit back into the neighborhood. It's a 5, 4, 3 story step back of massing. And these are the landscaping plans as they've kind of been evolving for the plaza. There you can see kind of some of the intended directions for the west side of the Curtis Block building and how it interacts and is tied into the plaza, which is a pretty major change from the party wall that's there now. Flipping through a lot of these. Let's see, they're at the point of pavers, pavement treatments, all the things as they're working through the individual bike racks, seating options, lighting, the different streetscapes. Different seasons, different corners and perspectives. Here's a little bit on that linear park. I think that's it. So I will quickly finish up the slides so we can get to discussion here. So if you probably, it's hard to see the site summary there, but you can see building 1 in terms of its composition, its size, and its uses there. 298 units is the total apartment yield with the 7 townhomes, 591 total spaces. 21 of those are street parking. And so if you get into, these are the slides from Planning Commission. They have 141% of the minimum parking requirement from our code, so they're kind of well within mins and maxes. I think one of the things that we've talked about numerous times to address is they have they're in excess of a 1 parking space per bedroom for the residential associated parking. There are 461 spaces available in that parking garage for multifamily. When you take away the 75 spaces required of the clinic, and that's they're at 400 bedrooms right now. Height and massing is part of the Planning Commission approval. You can see kind of the surrounding buildings that range from 7 to 15 stories to 6 stories, but predominantly the 543 should fit in well in the neighborhood, and is really it's not a dramatic change from the preliminary massing and height that was proposed. Setbacks vary. Some of this is elevation considerations in terms of building placement. Some of it is to allow things like the linear park and more space, like towards Bell, the corner of Bell and Detroit, more space for retail use on the side with that 30-foot setback versus like the 17-foot setback on the other side. But that plaza ranges from 56 feet at the front of the building 1 there at the corner to 119 feet at the center of the main portion. Final plat, this is something that will be part of the package that is submitted. We just need to get the vehicular and pedestrian access easements added, and then any final comments from the city engineer, and they will print that out. And we will have that ready. The traffic impact study that was completed by Ferris and Associates. This is the conclusions and recommendations. As a summary. So as I noted in the Planning Commission, you're comparing these uses to a hospital. The trip generation of the proposed uses, as they've noted, is about half of what would be expected of a hospital of a similar size or the existing size on the site, which is good. And then there's a totally different trip generation model between a hospital and a predominantly residential use. But most of the net improvements that are recommended here they were recommended regardless of the development. Some of it is signal timing that just needs to be looked at and addressed. So this is also being reviewed right now by city engineer and our engineering consultant contract. So, and that's based on discussion with Planning Commission for consistency with the traffic study that was submitted for the preliminary review versus this. It's just part of the process to make sure that they're consistent and nothing dramatic has changed. And then the proposed use table and map. This is the same, just an updated area map that shows where the uses that are proposed are allowed in terms of areas A, B, and C, and D in those buildings. And this was also a part of the Planning Commission approval. This table of uses, I don't believe has changed through the preliminary. It's been the same. It matches and is really built upon your development objectives and the advisory team and all those things. It's kind of it's almost one of the first things that you develop in terms of what you're looking to get out of the site and allow. And so just going back to the Planning Commission approval on the 5th, the 5 conditions that they have provided us pending the minutes being approved on the meeting on the 3rd. So these are draft conditions. Those access easements need to be added to the plat, and they will be done. There's the connecting crosswalk between the site and the health clinic. Discussed rideshare parking or drop-off zones along Detroit in some of those spaces. About half of the frontage on Detroit is taken up by the GCRTA stop that's being integrated in the plan. Sat through at least 1 or 2 meetings between Casto and RTA in terms of the transit waiting environment design and integrating that in terms of Dimmitt's plans, and so that's part of it. Then there are spaces that are to the east, parking spaces to the east, and so that's something that city engineer will consider to look at those spaces in terms of the demand turnover and designating some of those for kind of the same use as those 3 spaces in front of the Garden Apartments in terms of a loading temporary express space or something to that nature. And then the city engineers reviewing the traffic study, and they wanted to make sure that planning and maintenance specifications for the trees and other landscaping, the important kind of details to make sure that the amount of work and effort and money that's spent on landscaping is done, that the work done prior to planting ensures their sustainability over time. And I will say that is another section of the development agreement in terms of maintenance. And so we just need to make sure that that has the proper details. And so I'll plan to reach back to Planning Commission in terms of their expertise on those standards, as well as our own streets and public works arborists, to make sure that they reflect the right standards. Still a hole. So this is my last slide. I just wanted to provide kind of I call it a content overview, because the development agreement is being drafted now. It's being worked on. We had a draft development agreement during the preliminary time frame. We had a draft compensation agreement. We just never got to the point of finalizing them. And so we have a shell to work off of, but as you probably guess and are aware, like the significant changes in terms of the site, predominantly in terms of building 1 and the uses and the density of those uses, the office versus retail, and the difference between grocer and general retail. A lot of those things have to be built in and update, but there are a lot of things in the development agreement, and that's why I just wanted to provide this to each of you and the members for your awareness. And you may be aware of it. Some of you are probably more experts to development agreements than I am, because I am not an expert. I come sitting here as a layman for this type of stuff and working through it as we go through. But at its heart, the development agreement spells out a lot of things. There's over 30 sections in the development agreement in the draft that was prepared for the first round, the preliminary round. A lot of it has to do, description of the projects and requirements. It outlines, and there were square footage requirements for office and the different uses and things that outline kind of what I just went through in terms of the plan. To confirm that, confirms things that are important, like preservation of the Curtis Block building, and there's contingencies for that as well in terms of historic preservation, should things like that not be met. Community space and city use is also a portion within the development agreement that spells out that public-private venture, the basic details, permitting requirements, that basic kind of initial process that I only assume then has to grow and evolve over time as it's put in implementation, just like anything else, and lessons are learned on both sides. There's a section on public art in terms of potential directions of projects, locations of projects, and processes for getting those projects in place. There's a whole section on sustainability in terms of developer responsibilities or directions and priorities that we as a city are asking them to go. Parking requirements are spelled out in grand detail, and that's a reflection of the hospital master agreement in terms of those requirements. There's contingencies that are spelled out. And one that I would highlight is the environmental contingencies. I think everyone's aware of on the site in terms of those considerations and basically the handover of those considerations from the city to the developer as they take ownership of the property. There's maintenance requirements. I talked a little bit about those. That's where those landscaping requirements should go in, but it also delineates the responsibility between Public Works Streets and the developer and property manager. Really important when it comes down to all of the bump outs and sidewalks and all that stuff that we talk about in terms of a project like this. It talks about the TIF, really just that there will be a TIF or there won't be a TIF, or in terms of that doesn't really go into grand details in terms of it, but it is in terms of one of those incentive pieces. It is this is the development agreement as the vehicle in which I guess you confirm the existence or no existence of that specific incentive. Talks about the details of the conveyance of the development site, how that happens, and the details and behind that. Construction of the project, it's important to everybody. If we get this project approved, this is where they'll talk about phasing, they'll talk about timelines, those types of things in terms of dates that have to be met, in terms of those phases and how they're going to approach that. There was a whole section on community engagement in terms of pre-construction meetings with neighbors and then during construction meetings with neighbors. I assume that is something that was in the original draft. It'll probably be in the draft, as we all know the importance of that. And it's one of the reasons that on my process schedule, I had a neighborhood meeting. I've kind of held that in abeyance right now because there's so many other things going on that we want to make sure we get to the right point before we move forward with that. And so, because, I mean, these folks have been through, for some of them, most of them, they've been through several iterations of this in a really long process, and we don't want to jerk them around. And so we're trying to be very conscious of that. Use and design restrictions, that gets into, there's a whole section on prohibited uses and some other things. And then is it a construction project, and you get into bonds, trades, insurance, warranty requirements, all of those types of things. So just from a glance at looking at kind of the draft, and that this is the draft from the preliminary project, just so everybody's aware, but I just wanted you to kind of have a general sense for some of the majority of the content that's in the development agreement. If you're like me and you don't deal with them every day. But this is, again, I've kind of walked through now the three main things that we're working to get to you at the beginning of November. And that is an approved plan that has been approved by Planning Commission and ABR, a final plat that has been reviewed by the city engineer and is ready to be signed, or it is signed by the Planning Commission and the city, and then the development agreement draft for your consideration. So I think with that is my last slide. And so I will stop talking and I'll turn it over to, if there's any other comments, we'll just go into discussion and really kind of hit questions or priorities or wherever you want to go. So.
Okay, great. Director Byington, did you have something you wanted to add?
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate what Assistant Director Boss had explained in regard to us not having the performer yet. And one of the reasons is because they changed their general contractor. So they're getting their numbers, and that's why we're a little behind. But they were very clear with us that their ask, they have not told us what it will be, but they said it won't be more than what they've asked for as far as incentive-wise in the past. And we have had initial discussions with some school representatives just to give them an update, kind of like today, where we are in the process, what the plan looks like now, and we let them know as well. As soon as we get the pro forma, we'll be starting to have further discussions with them, primarily in regard to the compensation agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation. I know we had wondered whether it was worth doing, but I think it's good for us all to get that clear overview and be on the same page on these matters so far. So I'm going to turn to colleagues. I know we had I'd asked folks to send in some questions to the planning team so they could be ready to address them, but I can also turn it over to folks to ask them directly. Councilwoman Stubing.
Thank you, Chair Keppel. And thank you for the updates on the parking spaces and the math behind the numbers with the hospital. And I'm thrilled to hear 460 spaces for 400 bedrooms. That's very good news. Because when I think about a project of this size, I think about what is the impact to the neighbors on Marlowe and Bell, right? And of course, parking is one of our probably top 3 issues, naturally comes to mind. So thank you. I'm thrilled to hear that there will be additional parking there. And I'm also thrilled to hear that you're considering drop-off, load, and temporary express areas. I think that's important and that's excellent. I know we had looked at those near the Pocket Park for that space back there, and I understand you're also considering them for out front on Detroit, and I would ask to maybe even stretch it around the corners to Bell and Marlowe as we consider. Sorry, I didn't get the total number of people that are going to be living here, but 298 units when we're talking about Amazon deliveries and pizza deliveries and every other delivery under the sun. That I don't know that bay in the back behind building 1, as all this is going in and out, I don't know that would work for that amount of traffic. So I'd like to see some consideration to possibly extending those temporary express areas. I think that's an excellent idea, and especially if we have additional parking in the building, in the parking garage for the retail, right? So they don't have to necessarily pull right up in front of, they can park in the garage and then walk around the building to the coffee shop on the corner or whatever's going to end up being in there. So I'm thrilled to hear that. I would like to get some more clarification, and I did bring this up at the ABR about the pet relief areas, and even tonight looking at the I think they're townhomes on Marlowe that I see that it looks like a bunch of bushes and shrubbery there, and that again makes me think that, well, they're going to go across the street on Marlowe and use their tree lawn over there. So if we could very specifically designate where folks are to take their pets once they leave the building, I think that is very important. I would like to talk about this plan being online, possibly for the general public to look at. I know Assistant Director Bossa had talked with you about getting the traffic plan together, because I'd like to look at that a little further and understand that a little bit better, because my friends over on the Gold Coast that are telling me that there's just a continuous flow of trucks in and out of those buildings over there. So any additional, as I said, the temporary parking areas I think will be very important. I did hear you say no semi-trucks needed for this as compared to the grocer, but have we considered moving vans and larger trucks for folks that are moving into 3-bedroom apartments? I think that we may be looking at maybe not a full-on semi-truck, but some bigger trucks for that type of activity, and also for any type of, not that necessarily they would be semi-trucks, but for appliance deliveries and the construction and carpeting deliveries, all those types of deliveries that are going to have to go into that back space. And before I close for the moment, if we could also talk about the meetings with the neighborhood. I'm thrilled to hear that you're going to start having those once you feel comfortable, and just the communication method to let them know that those are coming, because that seems to be a concern with some folks on these bigger projects, that they didn't know and they couldn't come to voice their opinions. Thank you.
Did you want me to?
I don't know if
can-
you wanted to respond to any.
Mac, yeah, we can definitely take, I mean, I'll take all these comments back to Casto. You know, the deliveries, I know they're taking into account, yeah, as they envision retail space and they envision the, you know, the density of this isn't Casto's first rodeo with these. I know they take into account the design vehicles when they looked at and there was a lot of back, if you remember from Planning Commission and ABR, the joint meetings, there's a lot of back and forth on the streetscapes for both Marlow and Bell, and like, really basically like, you know, how narrow can we make Marlow or Bell in terms of like bump outs and parking? And there were bump outs that they wanted to see if they could do parking on both sides of Marlow, because I think more of the parking on Marlow was on the east side, and they were asking if you could fit. So they've gone through kind of their standard, you normally in the design with design vehicles and things, and I think they've, you know, in terms of their due diligence and accounting for the traffic that you see on any residential street in Lakewood, which could include a moving truck, you know, moving vans, appliance delivery, all those things in terms of their standard design vehicles that they've built into turning movements and the widths of the streets and things. So I'm fairly confident that that's been accommodated in there. I will get, my predominant method of posting things has been on the downtown development website. I've tried to keep the updates to date, and that's when, you know, I posted the plat, the traffic impact study, those things kind of in the resources as things have come in. But predominantly it's that the updates just get, another update gets put up there, and I will try to have links directly to the presentations. The presentations are, you know, anytime anything's presented to Planning Commission or ABR, it's available on the city website as well, under that meeting, just as the council kind of docket items are available for public consumption. So in terms of communication, I know we've followed our adjacent to adjacent, because every time we have one of these meetings, it's like a couple thousand letters go out. And so, but we can always work to do better in terms of notifying, whether it's online. It seems no matter what method you use, you miss a certain target demographic. I know you're all well aware of that, but we do try to communicate electronically, via mail, and some of the times when we do have when we've had neighborhood meetings in the past, and it's easier with a site like that you can put up yard signs too. I think that'll probably help for those neighborhood meetings. When we get back to that point of having neighborhood meetings, it's easier to put a couple yard signs up and down Marlow and Bell. So.
To that point, there is on the downtown development page, people can sign up, I think, for alerts about downtown development specifically to get those emails, correct? Is that, yeah.
And that's another we try to, through community relations, has the like constant contact program that generates those notifications. So.
And I'll just add, the way that the presentations sometimes for the planning commission, like the way the PDF generates is not, it's much easier to have it separated out rather than like if it's linked with the other things and it's all different sizes and you're jumbling around. So I'm sure you're familiar, but Yeah, right. So
Everything.
appreciate those being pulled out separately on the downtown development page for easy consumption. I did something else you mentioned about the, the community meetings and that being part of the development agreement, both pre-construction, during construction, and then I was also thinking with the traffic study, looking at the difference between the traffic, it's actually would be lesser than when it was a hospital of similar size. However, it's been several years not having anything there, so it is going to be a big adjustment, as I'm sure you're familiar with the community. So I'm just thinking too, in addition to meetings, is there conversation about how we help the neighborhood transition? So it's going to be a big shock, and like initially with folks, just change management essentially, because it would, to the point about moving trucks, eventually we get to the point hopefully where there's not 10 moving trucks on every weekend, but initially you're going to have a lot of change very quickly. So just thinking in terms of how we can help our neighbors in our community transition. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I'm just wondering if that's something that's being thought about. Okay, I'll turn to Councilman Rader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Assistant Director Boss, for very thorough and good presentation on what we know so far. I have 3 questions. I've got a lot of questions, but I think I've kind of marked most for Casto, so we can save a little bit of time. But you mentioned the CRA1 affordable housing portion. How does that map onto this new sort of number of units? And can you just give us a quick refresher on kind of what that means, what that looks like? And I assume that would only apply if they decided to take the TIF. Is that correct? Or maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think as I understand it, and so CR1 is a separate incentive from a TIF. It's a tax abatement. And so it applies to it's the rental units. So it should apply to the 298 rental units on the site if they elect to take that incentive. And then the way that it was last updated, I think it was 2019, it was added, the affordability aspect was added to it. So it's 20% of the units. So I'm not going to do math in public, but 20% of 298. 10%, so 10%, so half of those are required to be rented by people that are at 80% or below of area median income. And so there's a certification process involved with that. It's like we do with a lot of the home and other residential assistance programs. You have to certify people's income levels, at the start of the program and as the program progresses. And so that's 10%. The other 10%, the other half of that affordable units, those are between 80 and 120% of area median income. And so that was the target that was restructured in 2019. And so that's the incentive in terms of that CRA that it's my understanding that Casto intends to take that incentive.
That's good to hear. I heard a statistic today from somebody that I met with that we have 800,000 units in the state. We're a deficiency of 800,000 units across all income levels, across all markets. But a full 250,000 of those are affordable units that we are in dire need of, and that's statewide. Statewide, our vacancy rates for rentals are around 6.5%, or excuse me, it's like 4.5%. The country is 6.5%. In Lakewood, we're darn near 1% vacancy rate, which is pretty incredible. So I have no doubt these units will fill quickly, and that's my top priority certainly with this project. A couple quick questions. Is the road connecting Marlowe and Bell, is that public or will that be a private road? This is important because we get calls all the time about private streets not being plowed because they're responsible to the landlord. And how does that work in terms of like our patrolling of that stretch of road? It looks like a regular road, but is it going to be a regular public road?
I think that's one thing we got to.
I think this is supposed to be a private easement.
Yeah, so that's one of those easements that we talked about in the plat. And I apologize, we have 3 different projects right now with public and vehicular easements. So that will have, it is privately owned, it's part of the plat, but it will have a public easement over it. So basically it should be treated like a public street.
That's helpful to know. Last question, the clinic does have those 75 spots that they're earmarked under the Lakewood Hospital agreement. How flexible is that? Are those spots going to be cordoned off and sort of like gated, or is there some flexibility in how those spots are used, like off office hours, things like that?
So those, Casto's working through, I had 2 conversations with them in the last 2 weeks about parking management. And so they are starting to, as they get into the different levels of granularity, they're starting to get into the granularity of parking operations and parking management within the garage. I do believe that those 75 spaces will probably be on the first floor of the garage, if I remember correctly from the discussion. The parking garage is, as I remember correctly, it's 3.5 stories, basically, the way that it's kind of designed as you go up. The upper floors of that garage are just based on design and likely behavioral usage are going to be residential. So there is an entry, to building 2 from the second floor of the garage. So you can go directly into that apartment on Marlowe. The rest of folks, getting to building 1 will kind of go to the north, flow down through, and that's where the elevator and that conveyance shaft is to go down, and then cross that plaza into the leasing office, and then go up into building 1. Everybody else goes south to building 4. So the first floor is what they are currently envisioning right now, to have the 75 clinic spaces, as well as the retail spaces. So as you kind of funnel people on that pedestrian flow up through there. So, but I don't know right now in terms of their specific plans internal, like is it going to be 75 contiguous spaces that are all marked? I highly doubt it, because those spaces are envisioned to be public, prior to 9 in the morning, after 6 o'clock at night. And so flexibility is the key in that, and it may just be that they have like we do, like a permit card or something that you swipe into the garage and you park in that area. So.
Thank you, Assistant Director. And that's it. Yeah, I have other questions that are more apropos of, I think, Casto, and will probably be answered in the agreement. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Would this be the first PUD in Lakewood? Sorry.
I don't think so. I think the lake homes, that I think that was the PD. So it's not the first, but it is. It will be it'll be the largest residential development in a long time, and that's what it's a good. Right now, I'm knocking on wood, it's a good year with Barry Buick, and a lot of these things kind of making the turn for it, that you're increasing a lot of that residential density in these sites that desperately need it, so.
And just, the mic wasn't on, but I was thinking the Planning Department administration, so let's get that on the record. And then, so, and as we've talked about it, right, in our meetings with Casto earlier this summer, council's kind of purview is the development agreement, whatever incentives might be asked for, final approval of this plan unit development. What is the administration envisioning as far as, is it the intention to send us the development agreement and say this is the development agreement, or to have kind of a little bit of a working ability to work with the developer and the administration to see if there's things that we see that are important to council?
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Councilman. Yes. Yeah, that's kind of what the October meeting's for, and to talk in general, and then I would imagine we'll have some executive sessions throughout the process. But I know that you have all expressed that you'd like to see the version as it's evolving, not at the very beginning, but not at the very end. So that is our intent, to keep everybody involved throughout the process.
Great, and we have, is it Procure Gradenhead that's helping us, or who's our counsel that's kind of leading the
Yes.
charge? Okay. Because as we follow the kind of evolution of the site, it's interesting, I was in a different role when we first started the process, and, even since I've been on council, we've gone from 200 units to 230, now to 305, so we're kind of changing how it's looking. And we've talked about this a little bit, losing Roundstone maybe was a hit economically, but as far as like vitality of the site, 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, is probably a little bit more lively. The parking garage, that's a big parking garage. I assume we're going to have some serious discussions about it with the incentive agreement and the development agreement and what that looks like. Now, what I would want to understand, though, and I like, because people say TIF, people say abatement. So and even just for the benefit of my colleagues and kind of just the public, when you think about the CRA, right? So, and let's kind of walk through these, right? So the CRA is, if you hit certain benchmarks, you can elect as a developer to try to get it. And those benchmarks are, 10%, 10%, under 80, between 80 and 120 of AMI. That is 15 years full abatement on the residential portion, right? Is that correct?
To dig into
Through Mr. Councilman, yes, I believe that's accurate, but we don't know what the exact request is yet.
Okay, but yeah, so that's available to them if they, because that wouldn't even, would that require like our approval, or are they just able to get it based upon the CRA?
Just at
it's available.
three mayors.
Yeah, when City Council passed the update to the CRA in 2019, that's available to all developments in the community with over 100 residential units.
Great, thank you. And so then, when we're talking TIF, a TIF is a tax increment financing, right? So, and you hear terminology of school TIF and non-school TIF. I think I remember what that was, but could you guys explain that a little bit? Because I assume if we're having meetings with the school district, that a school TIF may be in play here.
Through you, Mr. Councilman. I'll have to double check the percentage, but I'm pretty sure if they're requesting more than 75%, and I'm not sure if it's over 15 years or 30, but then that would require the school's approval. So again, it depends on what they're going to ask for, but I believe that's the parameters for that.
Okay, and then, so then as you break down the site, and then this is what I'm curious about is, so for example, building 1 has 28,000, 30,000 square feet of commercial, and then a certain amount of units on top of it. How would we split that from the CRA and the TIF? Because the CRA only applies, is the valuation broken down from commercial and residential? I'm just curious. Or if we,
So through Council President to Councilman Baker, I believe these are conversations that we need to have with Bricker Graydon to fully understand how the process is going to work. It's a very complicated development with multiple uses and being in the same building and over top, of each other. So I don't think I'd be premature to try to answer that question. I think we need to really work with Bricker Graydon to give you a better answer on that.
okay, yeah, and I'm just trying to kind of, because it's, I'm a visual person, so as we go through this process, it would be helpful to kind of see like which parts of the site. This is CRA, this is year 15 to 30 TIF, and this is year 1 to 30 TIF or whatever, and this is 80-20 or 20. So it's just because I think that, I mean, it's unique, this is city-owned property, so there's that part of it, right? And it looks like the development agreement is going to have some statement to that effect, right? The transfer of the property and what compensation or lack of compensation will be there. But then, and that's what makes it particularly unique, but then the other part is the TIF and the abatement, and those are things available to anyone, regardless if it's city-owned or not. And those are the things that I think are directly the purview of City Council, and I look forward to working with you all on it and having enough time for that to breathe, right? So it sounds like you've built into this process, we'll be going through the budget process as well. So it's going to be lots of meetings. Merry Christmas, happy Hanukkah to us as we have final approval, probably during like the college football playoffs, which is like Christmas time for me. But so yeah, I mean, I appreciate this effort, and I think you guys have done a nice job of kind of laying out where we're at, where we're going. But you know, I mean, that's the development agreement, the compensation agreement. That's where we're at, and it sounds like you guys have heard us loud and clear on that. So look forward to those discussions.
I think that's part of the value of this opportunity, is that we kind of, you get what's important and the questions that need to be answered and everything kind of out on the table, so that we're not having this discussion on the 18th of November, but that we've all kind of been led through the same process, multiple azimuth checks to make sure that we're kind of seeing eye to eye. You see the draft that we're working on before the process. And I think you understand the complexity and all the different parties that play into a system like this. And yeah, it is, you know, looking at, I think, you know, drafts is just not helpful right now, because it's so much has changed since the last kind of iterations of development agreement, compensation agreement, and TIF, in relation to all the uses that you talked about and the percentages and everything. That there are some highly complex incentives that were aligned, and I think that's why we're allowing that process to play out right now. And it is important to note that Casto understands that the more that they delay in terms of providing those financials, the right side of this process can continue to kind of shift, if that makes sense. Like I'm not at the point of pressurizing anyone else's time frame except their own, like, to get it. So I think
yeah, they see Fed rates and where they're going to. So I mean, I'm sure that's part of it. But so and it sounded like earlier, the administration is willing to bring in PMC to help us, whether it's an exec session or not. Is there any ability to have whoever our counsel is at Bicker Graydon to come and talk to us too about the kind of the more machinations of the development agreement?
Well, I think that's what our original plan for this meeting, and will be the plan for the October meeting, is that we were going to have Casto, our representation, and we can look at the timing in terms of when we get the financials and the relationship. Or I guess it's a turnaround at that point of when we provide them to PNC, how much time do they need to turn around on those numbers, if it would be in time for the 21st or not. But I will do everything I can in my power to kind of pull all those parties together so that we can have a productive discussion.
Yeah, and I would suggest that at various times we should be thoughtful about, Casto's our partner, they need to be in the room, but there are some times where they might not need to be in the room, so we can have candid conversations with our counsel and PMC and the administration to have those discussions. So.
I'm going to actually jump back and go to Councilmember Bullock. Are you still with us? I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
You can.
Okay. Hope the audio is not too crummy. Okay, I've been following along. Good slides. Boy, just the landscaping add a nice element. Hopefully those trees look that large on day one. That's a joke, but I think that is a point in support of the Planning Commission's requirement that the infrastructure underneath the ground be ready to sustain that. So, David, I appreciated your slide that used the council development priorities as a kind of a metric sheet or a checklist or scorecard. And as I think about this, we're making good progress. So if you look at density, 298 units, that's 50% larger than the Meridian or the Marine Towers West. It's half of the Carlisle. Kyle Baker just said 305 units. Maybe I lost a few. But, it's been said Lakewood would not be the densest community in Ohio except for the Gold Coast neighborhood. So this development promises to be something like a Gold Coast building right in the heart of downtown, in a walkable, very, very ultra walkable area of our community. So that's very positive as I step back and reflect. We've done a stronger and stronger job of historic preservation. That's great. Your points, David, about flexibility. I do feel the sting of losing Roundstone and the grocer, but you're making a good point that the upside is that in this uncertain market, you want configurable space both On the retail side and the use side, which means residential is kind of the most resilient use case at the moment. Those are both market solutions, but plan smart. It sounds like we're well on our way towards a smart plan that positions ourselves to have good market solutions. Affordable housing, we've taken meaningful action, or we'll find out a change if CASTA proposes one. Fiduciary responsibility, we've been talking about that. We're going to get to that in October. So then that leaves the opportunities. All three of the following elements are in the development agreement, as you pointed out: sustainability, parking, and the public space. And so my question really is, do you agree with that characterization that we could make some, City Council's not going to go back in the next 4 to 12 weeks on a lot of these elements, but on at least some of these elements, for sure, fiduciary responsibility, but also these other ones, sustainability, parking, public space, we could drill down together to make sure that our heavy investment of time, acreage, public dollars in publicly owned real estate yields the best fruit for the community, in year 1, in year 15, in year 30, by being thoughtful. Okay, and so sustainability, to me, probably a big opportunity to make sure they have highly efficient systems, which will cost them more, but will pay off over time if they're a long-term owner, which they are. It should pencil out. Maybe there's some ways to get them financial tax credit assistance, although they should know how to get that with their own version of Bricker law firm. The parking discussion we've had here and there over the months, I don't claim to be the expert on how that ought to be configured, but if we put some thought to making sure that those public access spaces are really serving intelligently and optimally, especially for the surrounding businesses, that could be a big boon. And then, of course, the public square or the public space, which we don't have to get into tonight, but it does seem like that's something that we could still spend some thoughtful work on and have an impact on. Am I barking up the right tree there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, those are all areas that well, it's specific. I mean, parking, I think right now, CASO is obviously, as I mentioned, they're moving into kind of the operations level of parking in terms of that management, which is a good sign to get to that level of detail. In terms of, and that does include public access, that was part of the term sheet. It will continue to be part of the deal in terms of ensuring public access to those spaces in relation to and kind of in coordination with the other uses on the site that require that parking. And then the public space itself, I think that they've done a good job taking 6 years of public and other input into the design. And I just speak of the physical design of the space itself to make it as kind of welcoming and inviting and flexible public space as possible that reflects the area, is an as we discussed in Planning Commission, ABR, is an improvement over some other well-intentioned or older public spaces, in the vicinity on Detroit. But it really sets the stage for the discussion of that management and the permitting process, I think, in terms of providing a good flexible canvas for a wide variety of uses and programming around the year. And I think that was always kind of the driving factor and the intention behind it. And so I think it's good that we're at that point, or ABR is kind of putting their final tweaks on that, and that we will get into the discussion of that management process, or at least putting a process in place that can be refined and improved over time as you get more experience in doing this kind of a public-private venture management of what's inherently a public space. So, and
yeah, that's helpful. And parting comments, just the details on that parking are, I think, as I gather, can be done well or less well. And obviously, we would want it done well. And same with the management agreement on the public space. I'm sure everybody intends well, but it would be certainly good to have some eyes on as that development agreement gets drafted, and certainly that's going to come before us. To me, those are areas that we may work, in partnership with the administration on to make sure those are strong as we conclude all this work. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. I'll just add, I know Assistant Director Boss is sick of me probably hearing me say this, but with the public space, I do feel like this current iteration is much more welcoming and than some past iterations and has a lot of potential. I am interested to see as we go through development agreement, as well as some of what the retail might be there, whether because there does have to be some thoughtful intention about, is this mostly intended as adult-focused outdoor dining from restaurants that are in that space? Is it the public space that we're going to have bounce houses and splash pads and families coming in and out for special events? Is it going to be my ice skating rink that I keep bringing up and for Light Up Lakewood? But things like what is the intent? And I still I feel like I am seeing more vision possibilities in this current iteration, but that is something I want to keep an eye on too. And also, like, I'm pleased to see the public restrooms in this iteration. I know that we've had some conversation back and forth with Castro about that, but also, how does that get programmed? How are they? And I know these are questions for down the line, but just in thinking too, is that enough? Or is it, so we don't want to have an intent for this space that isn't, the form doesn't follow the function. So anyway, I'll go Councilwoman Marks.
Thanks. I'll be brief. Thank you, Mr. Boss, for a very thorough rendition of this space. I'm real pleased to see some of the changes that have taken place. I'm primarily concerned with the financials, so I will wait till October to hear about that. And I do feel that in consideration of President Keppel's remarks about the commercial space, I think the commercial space will drive what's happening in that public space, and careful consideration has to be made with what is going to go into that commercial space and how does Casto plan on encouraging people to consider that for their business, because I think that will be pivotal on how that public space is utilized. So thank you again for your hard work, and I look forward to our meeting in October.
Councilmember Evans.
Thanks, Chair Keppel. Thanks, Assistant Director Boss. For one, I really appreciate you talking through the process and the project and giving us all that background. I don't think we're going to make any more progress today on the public space, so I will leave those questions for next time. I do have one question in regards to traffic and the traffic study. Building on what something Councilmember Keppel said earlier about the going from decreased traffic to new traffic and these two streets once again becoming prominent cut-throughs. Does the traffic study recommend any changes to signalization or any other issues in regards to Franklin Avenue? And also, has the administration considered traffic calming in, at the building traffic calming into the Bell and Marlowe, moving south away from the project towards Franklin to work concurrently with this project?
I know that the traffic study does talk about the intersections at Franklin were part of the study that were integrated into that. And again, I have to go back and look at the specific details. There is language in that, in the summary and then in the rest of the report that talk about those specific intersections of Bell and Marlowe and Franklin, and really being cautious that you don't, in terms of the you don't go overboard with treatments and make the situation worse from what it is now, because there was consideration of turn lanes and other things back in there, and really changing kind of the character of those intersections from what they are now. But I know there's more on detail on that in the traffic impact study, and I have not, frankly, I have not looked at or considered traffic calming on either street. I know that the way that our program is designed right now, it's not necessarily something that we proactively go looking for problems to solve, but it is something that, that we do. We validate a problem and then work with the neighborhood to put an appropriate solution in there. So it would be something that I think we would want to keep that same approach for the surrounding neighborhood. So, but it is a concern, I think, and that's just like we've been through this before with even on small sites like the truck park at Edwards, and people forget what was there before and the buildings and everything that used to be at the corner of Edwards and Detroit. And then when you take that away for 10 years and it becomes a dirt lot that people park on, and they get really mad when you take that away and build something there. So I can appreciate going through that same process. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that's, I anticipate that also with the Barry Buick free parking lots right now going away at some point. But so I thank you very much for all of those answers and for preparing this presentation and all of your hard work on this. I know this is an ongoing big project, and to carry it forward after Director Leininger left and Director Byington coming on. So we really appreciate you, Assistant Director Boss, and the administrative team for moving this forward. I did have one thought. I know, Bill, I was just thinking in terms of the traffic study and how that intersects with the active transportation plan, and I'm sure that's something you're looking at. I know Bell is a bike corridor, and we have, obviously, it's on the bus line because we already talked about the RTA station. But been thinking about that too in terms of our sustainability measures and all of these folks who'll be moving into these 400 bedrooms, hopefully wanting to, get around with active transportation and reduce their carbon footprint. And I just thinking about that intersectionality, and I'm sure you are too, but just wanted to highlight that. And then I just wanted to go back to one small question. This is a minor point, but just before I forget, Councilman Rader asked about the street by the Pocket Park, going through the Pocket Park, about that being a private street but with a public easement. Does that mean easement in terms of the public has access to it, or that it would be publicly maintained, or it would be privately maintained?
Through you.
Yeah.
I believe that it will be privately maintained, but we have yet to see, I haven't seen the language that goes along with that easement. I know that there'll be perpetual public access through there. My understanding is that they would be responsible for maintaining it, but we'd have to clarify that, and we will.
Great. And I know the Pocket Park was intended for public access as well, but just making sure I'm sure that's going to be in the development agreement as well.
Yes.
Right. And then the same thing with the development agreement. I do appreciate all the landscaping that's being shown, all the trees in the Planning Commission noting about the infrastructure to maintain those trees. Would those be privately maintained, or is that considered tree lawn and it's public trees?
Yeah, through you. And at this point, they've said it would all be private.
Okay.
So again, that's something that we can put into the development agreement.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anyone else have final questions for this evening, knowing that we have many more meetings to come? Yes. Oh, yeah, Councilwoman Marks.
I just happened to think of something. Are they considering any special bike storage for residents living in the apartments? Because we are an active biking community, and I don't know if they have that in their plans, but it might be something for them to consider.
Through you, Council President. Yes, they did speak to that at the last Planning Commission meeting, or it could have been the last ABR, but they did say that two things, that one, they're going to have more racks outside, and that they were planning on having storage areas for the residents within the apartments.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
Any further questions? More comments from the administration? Just want to thank everyone again. I know a lot of hard work goes into this, and we really appreciate taking the time tonight, and I appreciate everyone's thoughtful questions and sending them in so we could have some meaningful dialogue tonight. So no further business. We're adjourned.